Well, we checked out the first episode of Season 2 of Rings of Power, which was pretty worthless in moving the story forward. So now it's time for Episode 2, and again, we're not going to waste any time and just get straight into it. Which starts us off by showing us the effects of Mordor have finally reached Khazad-dum, where we first find former Prince Durin and Disa doing their weekly shop, and yet again we're reminded of the events of Season 1. Durin tries to buy what looks like a mushroom, but as we're told, they're trying to save money since Durin was disowned by his father, who both haven't spoken since their argument over Mithril because Durin doesn't think he'll agree to see him. Basically, both of them are too stubborn to talk with each other. Disa then feels a vibration within the mountain, and then this happens. So these are the effects Mordor has started to have, which does make me wonder why it's taken this long to reach the dwarves when Mount Doom exploded weeks ago. They should have already felt the effects of that, and to make matters worse, now they've lost their only sources of light, somehow every single one. But that is our reintroduction to the dwarves, which by the looks of it are in some deep shit. We then cut to Galadriel, who we find planting seeds beside her brother's memorial until Celebrimbor shows up.
I've had an unexpected visitor.
So you probably get the idea that this is the ring and its power starting to affect her. Celebrimbor is then grabbed by the roots, and not before saying that these are the seeds Galadriel was planted finally taking root, as in, this is her fault. So the ring seems to have given Galadriel premonitions of the future, and with that it seems as though it's very important Celebrimbor is checked on and warned. Galadriel was then dragged away from her vision where Gil-Galad is planning an attack on Mordor and asks for the whereabouts of Sauron.
Our spies indicate that Sauron was last seen travelling into Mordor.
So my first question is, how do they even know what Sauron looks like? They've never seen him before. The only ones in Lindon who have is Elrond, who's disappeared, and Galadriel. I guess the elves have a sketch artist of some kind. Secondly, if your spies have seen him enter Mordor, why haven't they seen him leave? Is the reason that can't happen because if they do, that would interrupt Sauron's plot? Yes. Yes, it is. The elves believe that Sauron plans to supplant Adar and claim his army, and if they act quickly, they'll be able to stop both of them. I'm not hearing a lot of actual war plans, but maybe Galadriel might have one.
We should send ships up the Anduin, invade Mordor from the west.
This is the weirdest war council I've ever seen.
It would be wiser to attack Adar from the east.
So one says north, another says east, and Galadriel says west, and not one of them gives a reason for why they think that those are the best options. Or even offer up more of a plan, but rather just say what direction to go, and Gil-Galad just picks one out of a hat. Are the writers even trying to get the audience immersed into this world? Because it doesn't seem like it.
It does not take the eye of an eagle to see your thoughts have flown far afield.
Was she seriously just going to walk off without saying anything about her vision which involved Celebrimbor, the very elf Sauron needs? Yet again, she has to be forced into mentioning something. Gil-Galad recognises Galadriel has something on her mind and asks what troubles her. She says Sauron may have travelled to Mordor, but they can't be sure that's where he remains. That Sauron sees himself not as a master of a barren waste, but all of Middle-earth. Wouldn't Gil-Galad know this when he's thousands of years old and was there before Sauron was embarrassingly killed? He shouldn't have to be reminded of this. But Galadriel goes on saying he seeks to rule by bending the minds and wills of its people to his own.
And for that he needs not armies, but rings.
So we're now 2 episodes into Season 2, and in all that time, when you know Sauron needs Celebrimbor for his plan to work, you haven't sent a host of elven soldiers to Eregion to guard Celebrimbor and make sure he doesn't let Sauron in. This is something that should have already been done, and what they should do this very moment. But Gil-Galad's response is, well, Sauron doesn't have an army, and Eregion has 2 rivers and walls. Which is about as retarded as you'd expect from Gil-Galad. Has he been asleep whenever the name fucking Sauron is said? It's Sauron. He won't be stopped by rivers that he can swim across. He won't be stopped by walls when all he has to do is get into someone's head and gain access to Eregion. This isn't just some normal guy, but Gil-Galad is convinced Celebrimbor's secrets of his craft are safe. Which even if those secrets were safe, he should still send soldiers to Eregion, even if he believes Celebrimbor has received their message. To do anything else is the stupidest thing you could do when, in your words, you wanted to stop Sauron from bringing his tyranny tyranny to Middle-earth. Galadriel then gets another vision of Sauron and follows after Gil-Galad, saying she's concerned about Celebrimbor, revealing that since she got her ring, she's seen glimpses of the unseen world. Gil-Galad reveals the same thing has been happening to him, claiming to have seen mountains crumbling, waters running dry and black clouds gathering over white towers. Kind of like Eregion, for example. Which is a pretty obvious indication that Celebrimbor isn't safe, and you're only just bringing it up now. When I was led to believe that Celebrimbor and Gil-Galad were friends, I guess I was wrong, they must hate each other. Because why else would Gil-Galad, regardless of his visions, not send help to Eregion? You'd expect him to be fearful of the fact he hasn't received word back from Celebrimbor after sending his very, very belated warning. But no, for whatever reason, nobody gives a shit about Celebrimbor. I guess because the script hasn't told them to yet. And it seems as though Gil-Galad is well aware what his visions could mean when Galadriel asks him to send her to Eregion, and that if Sauron is there, she'll send word. Gil-Galad, in an effort to become the episode's biggest retard, denies this request, saying he can't let her face Sauron again, his reason being that Sauron has the ability to sculpt people's very thoughts once he's obtained their trust, which then allows him to deceive not only their hearts and minds, but also their eyes and ears and alter their very reality. Which is somewhat true based on the finale of Season 1. Based on Episode 1 of Season 2, that doesn't seem to be the case. Especially after Sauron failed to manipulate a group of pea-brained orcs. The thing I'm curious about with this scene is that when Gil-Galad lists off Sauron's top trump abilities, he doesn't actually know this. It's just something people have been known to say. First off, why doesn't he know this to be true? And if he doesn't, why the fuck hasn't Galadriel told him about her experience when it's very useful information? Secondly, if Gil-Galad believes this to be true, that's maybe another reason to send help to Eregion, you absolute fucking clown person. Galadriel responds to this by saying the reason she should go is because Sauron knows her mind just as she knows his, and why her alone can slay him. Which isn't a great reason, and also proves her narcissistic nature. With what's at stake, the entirety of Middle-earth, why can't she just tell Gil-Galad that he needs to send someone? He has armies at his disposal. So as long as Sauron is stopped, that's all that really matters. It's no longer about your personal vendetta, this is now about saving innocent people. Gil-Galad still refuses to send her, saying she once considered Sauron a friend.
Halbrand was not.
Sauron.
If he's already refused to let you go to Eregion, that little slip-up is not gonna help. And then after claiming that only her alone could face Sauron, she folds pretty quick and asks Gil-Galad to send people with her, which seems to catch his attention now. Now it grabs his attention. He didn't think of that before until Galadriel said it. How did this guy ever become king? I'm already starting to get the feeling this episode is going to be a lot worse than the previous episode because that incompetence was painful. We then cut over to Eregion where Sauron is informed his access has been denied. I don't know why he'd expect anything less. I don't know why he thinks Galadriel never told Celebrimbor about him or the elves in Lindon to then tell him about Halbrand being Sauron. So it's strange he didn't just take another form like we know that he can so nobody recognises him. He then asks to speak with Celebrimbor directly, only to be told he's occupied and wishes him good fortune on his journey. Sauron refuses to leave, saying he'll wait where he is in case Celebrimbor changes his mind. I don't know why you would think he would when there's a possibility, especially with this greeting of what is essentially fuck off, that he knows you're Sauron. And your plan was to just turn up and wave. Alright then. He then goes into phase 2 of his plan by making sure Celebrimbor's receptionist sees that he's injured. Something she eventually informs him of, but firstly tells him that Sauron refuses to leave. To which Celebrimbor says he can refuse to leave all he wants and he still won't be allowed in. Because as he reminds us, he promised Galadriel he wouldn't treat with him again, something that Sauron didn't account for. He then mentions that they should receive news from Lindon any day, and what do you know? Yep, the messenger's dead. How very convenient for Sauron, because that news reaching Eregion would destroy every chance he has. And for some reason I'm not shocked at all about this outcome when it's the most predictable thing they could do. With both episodes of Season 2 so far, the writers have just been trying to delay everyone, no matter how out of character they are, all because it messes with the plot they want to string together. And to achieve this, they've made it so Gil-Galad doesn't send help to Eregion even when it's in his best interest. He knows the threat Sauron poses, which was the main reason he decided to take the risk and use the rings, because otherwise Middle-earth would be left to Sauron's tyranny, who he knows needs Celebrimbor for his talents, and he doesn't send anyone to help and prevent it. He does nothing. All in service of the fact the writers are shit at their jobs and can't think of any other way to write it, so instead just destroy everything in their path without any thought. And that takes us over to Western Rune to get our introduction to the Dark Wizard, who as we learn was the mastermind behind the real Slim Shady. We find them performing a ritual where one of the women cut their hands to sacrifice their blood for whatever they're trying to achieve, which as it turns out is to bring back our M&M insert, who is apparently not dead, or maybe she is. I can't quite say. The Dark Wizard asks her what news she brings from the White Wings, whatever that is. She tells him of Sauron's return and that he's taken a new form to deceive his enemies. But it seems like the wizard is more interested in the East Star, that of course meaning Not-Gandalf. He says he hears of whispers from scavengers and thieves of an old man in rags with two halflings, which as we know have been watching them. Slim Shady says he's lost and vulnerable and is then cut off by the wizard, who seems to be pissed off that she failed to capture him. He says he won't be vulnerable for long because it's only a matter of time until he harnesses his full power. And then finishes with saying it was a waste of blood to bring her before him, which now has just left me confused. You brought back Slim Shady not so she could tell you anything, but for you to tell her where Not-Gandalf has been spotted. And then say you wasted blood to bring her back. Why the fuck did you bring her back then? Unless the idea is for her to prove her worth, which I guess we'll wait and see if that turns out to be the case. They're then interrupted by one of the scavengers returning after being sent out, who says that he's found Not-Gandalf and knows how to capture him. And if the wizard heals the curse upon his people's flesh, basically they've got a skin condition, he'll bring Not-Gandalf back in chains. Something the wizard scoffs at, considering his very own Slim Shady failed to do so, as he calls her his most powerful acolyte, who was beaten by some fucking Harfoots. So what can this random scavenger do? I know, right? It doesn't seem likely. That is until the scavenger reveals his master plan, which is, if Not-Gandalf doesn't surrender, he'll slaughter Nori and Poppy. In what way is that a fucking idea or even a response? It's honestly not that different from Slim Shady's approach. She tried to kill Nori and the other Harfoots and failed. And yet the wizard is bewildered as if this is some imaginative plan. When put simply, it's just, we'll use the leverage we have. When any other normal person would react to that plan by posing the question, yeah, then what? Because the scavenger hasn't grappled with the fact that Not-Gandalf is a magic user. He hasn't even begun to account for that. So that's that scene, I guess. Didn't have much to say other than establishing the Dark Wizard is after Not-Gandalf, and it took them 4 minutes, when you could achieve that with a fucking line. But it's just another example of this show taking so long to say very little, which is a common occurrence. And that pushes us on to see what the Not-Gandalf and Harfoots are up to, and they're walking through the desert again, so not much has changed. But who knows, maybe they'll give us something this time around.
No one can give you a name. It is yours already.
Oh, fucking hell. I guess not. Instead, Nori is trying to find out and give Not-Gandalf a name, which according to Galaxy Brain over here, can't be given because it's already yours. I wonder what he'd say if Nori said her name was given to her. Maybe the writers would walk back that retarded statement. Poppy then realises that the map says if they turn northeast, they'll be able to cut this leg of their journey in half. So they make their way there until they reach a massive stretch of desert, which wasn't on the map apparently, and they ultimately decide not to due to the heat and lack of water. So they set up camp and Poppy questions whether Not-Gandalf could just magic them up some water because she wants to take the desert route. Bit of a lazy bastard. Nori tells her that he won't because he's afraid of losing control again without a staff, which Poppy believes any old stick would do for some reason. Not-Gandalf finally shuts them up after hearing horses approach, so they pack up their things and hide until the scavengers leave because apparently They didn't think to check the very obvious sheet Nori and Poppy used to hide. The writers seem to think this can play out exactly the way it did for Frodo and Sam. I guess they didn't realise this cloak Frodo used to hide him and Sam was an elven magic cloak.
May these cloaks help shield you from unfriendly eyes.
This is not that. It's a piece of random fabric pierced with giant holes that anyone can see through. The scavengers can't see through their masks, I guess. Another thing is that it's clear the scavengers were tracking them, so then why didn't they see that the Harfoots had been here and then followed their trail to where they were hiding? I don't know. But realising they're being tracked, they all decide to take the path across the desert. You know, that place where there's nowhere to hide, and you stand out to people watching you from the hills. Yeah, they're going to take that path. But luckily, that takes us back to Khazad-dum and their current situation. We learn that their gardens have withered. How that happened so quick, we don't know. I also have a question about why you would farm inside a mountain as opposed to outside. Sure, they had beams of light source from the sun, but that isn't exactly practical, so it wouldn't give you much food. And we've now seen what can happen from an earthquake, which are pretty common within mountains. Which has now led to no light source, so why wouldn't they grow food outside when it's a lot easier and straightforward? It seems like that and trading are the best two options. Not growing it in a fucking mountain where you have to awkwardly move mirrors to shine the light down to very small and few spots. We're then told there's rumours of dark omens across all Dwarven realms, which some are blaming on Durin for letting Elrond in, even though it was because Elrond used the right of Sigyn Tarag to get in and they let him in. It wasn't Durin that let him in. The two Dwarven women say this in front of Disa for some reason, and she tries to rid them of their worries, saying they're going to prove nothing bad is going on. And so they meet with the king because, as we know, Disa is one of the stone singers who sing to the mountain and find safe ways to dig. The king is told about what happened in what is now called Mordor and the effects this has had on Khazad-dum, listing their collapsed sun shafts and ability to grow crops, which wouldn't be the case if you farmed outside. He then says the obvious remedy is to send the dig teams in to repair the shafts and create new ones. Or, I do have a better idea, and I know I've said it multiple times now, but rather than go to all that work, just start planting outside and as a bonus do some trade. That's the quickest plan at the moment, but no, they've got to dig for a mountain. That's the only way. Disa then pipes up saying every stone singer has failed to identify a safe path to dig. She then goes on to ask the king's approval to find the light, and they go out to sing and only make it worse. This also shows Disa's power level, so how they're going to fail to beat a Balrog with those lungs, I don't know. The king finally accepts that darkness has now fallen over Khazad-dum. Am I missing something? I feel like this isn't that big of a deal when you consider what the problem here is. You've lost your sunlight due to an earthquake, and with that lost your ability to grow crops. But if you were to go outside and plant crops and drum up trade, especially with the elves when they were willing to give you food in exchange for mithril, that'll fix your problem. I suppose the only thing is that you've lost your ability to find safe ways to dig for gems, diamonds and mithril. But surely you won't have to wait that long until the mountain settles to then continue digging. So I don't really get this woe is me attitude. The king then asks for a word about Durin, saying that surely Durin knew he spoke in anger. Although I don't see how that's the case when he disowned him. It wasn't just the argument. Disa tells him that if he's trying to apologise, to say it to Durin.
Why should it be me who apologises? It was he who caused offence.
I didn't realise the king was 5 years old. Disa says that both him and Durin are stubborn, causing the king to go on a massive cope session, saying that what Disa calls stubbornness, some dwarves call strength. No, it's just called unreasonable. Disa continues to argue that no wonder they can't hear the mountains when the king is deaf to the sorrow of his own son, and that if the king wants to show strength, he should summon Durin, which she believes he'll answer. We cut away to find Durin working in a mine, something he's had to do since he was disowned. He looks down on his hands covered in blisters, which the other dwarfs tease him about, saying it's because he's got palace hands after only polishing jewels all his life, which I don't actually think is true. In Season 1, we seen Durin working in a mine, digging for mithril, the same as when he and Elrond were digging behind the king's back. It didn't look as though Durin had never done this before. Even when the mithril dig site collapsed on the dwarves, he personally got them out. He wasn't polishing jewels, which the writers seem to have forgot. The other dwarves then claim that Durin and the king are the reason they're in this mess and touches his face, so Durin threatens him, which doesn't make much of a difference when he's pushed over. Surely they know that they're in this mess because of an event that was completely out of their control. Everyone should know that by now. It shouldn't be because of the superstitious notion that Durin let an elf into Khazad-dum. But no, they just blame Durin for a volcano exploding. We then cut away to Durin being served his dinner by Disa, who asks about his kids, and we find out have refused their meal, which Durin can understand because they're eating last year's bread. How has Khazad-dum already ran out of food? Surely they must have had reserves in case of an event like this. Why am I even asking this question? Because they haven't even figured out to farm outside, so why would they think to have reserves? Durin asks why she hasn't traded for fresh grain from the surface, and we're told the king hasn't allowed anyone to trade. Is the king trying to be overthrown? Why would he not have already been trading to get food for his people? And why would he deny anyone else from doing so? How does that make any sense? Disa tells Durin he needs to go and apologise to his father and convince him to allow them to trade. Which in a scenario like this, why wouldn't he? We've been shown Durin cares about the well-being of the dwarves and is a man of the people, so you'd think he'd just suck it up and sort out food for the other dwarves. Durin then goes on to rant about if his father hadn't have thrown Elrond out to rot, they'd have enough food for 500 years. Disa says this isn't about food, they can't hear the mountains anymore and she's afraid. And I'm starting to get the impression that there might be an implication that the dwarves believe they have fallen into some kind of magical darkness. When based on everything we know, it's just some bad luck mixed in with some bad planning. Durin attempts to calm her down, saying they'll get by because they're dwarves and always have, which he accepts he doesn't know how. We cut back to Lindon to find Elrond building a boat for some reason. Galadriel comes in to talk with him, saying all their letters to Celebrimbor have gone unanswered. All your letters? You sent one, after an entire day. She says she fears Sauron is in Eregion, which I don't actually buy, because when you got the vision of Celebrimbor, you weren't going to say anything until Gil-Galad forced you to. Who she says has consented to send her and a small party to Eregion to ensure Celebrimbor's safety. You're honestly going to potentially face Sauron with a small party, not like, say, an army. She asks Elrond to join them, which he takes joy in the fact that she always calls him nothing more than a politician, and now wants his help in a potential battle. Which I'm interested to see how they justify Elrond being of any use in that kind of scenario, considering this show has made it so he's only a politician. Galadriel then makes it clear that Gil-Galad has refused to send her to Eregion unless Elrond agrees to go. Why hasn't he just already sent people? What's with this huge delay and Gil-Galad thinking Galadriel needs to go? Surely there's better warriors than her, but no, there just doesn't seem to be any urgency. So if Elrond says no, then I guess no one gets to go. She says that Gil-Galad fears she could be vulnerable to Sauron, and Elrond makes a good point about her defying the king's orders before, but not now. And that probably has something to do with delaying them because of the plot. She says that she hasn't defied him this time because he's right, saying Sauron used me and under his hand I was played like a harp to a melody not of my choosing. What a line. Clearly an attempt on the writer's part to sound intelligent, but in fact comes across as AI generated, when it isn't really a hard thing to come up with. Elrond finishes the AI generated line saying that Sauron looked inside her and plucked the very song of her soul, note by note. Fuck me. Can we just stop with the metaphors because they seem to be getting more prevalent the longer this season goes on? Elrond continues that Sauron made himself someone Galadriel needed to take her to victory, that she gave him everything and thanked him for it, the same he's now done with Gil-Galad and the rest of the elves. Meaning he made the rings, gave them to the elves, and they stupidly decided to use them without any thought of the possible ramifications. Elrond finally has enough of her, haven't we all? And after her pleas for help because of coming to terms with her vulnerability, Elrond says in choosing to wear those rings, they've become Sauron's collaborators, and he wants no part in it.
What?
Why wouldn't Elrond want to go to Eregion when he knows all the information Galadriel does? That his friend, Celebrimbor, is in trouble and Sauron could be the cause. He didn't want the elves to use the rings because Sauron played a part in their creation, which he needed Celebrimbor for. Regardless of your feelings on the rings, this situation is something you would want to see to. But now, all of a sudden, you don't give a shit whether your friend lives or dies, or if Sauron tries to corrupt more people. People which include the dwarves and Durin, and what this could also mean for the world. This is not what we've been led to believe about Elrond, at least this season, with what he's motivated to do. He was doing mostly fine up until this point, but now I guess that adds another character to the pile of character carcasses. Galadriel's last-ditch effort is to remind him of a promise he made her about if Sauron ever returned, he promised to put it right. Why don't you maybe try reminding him that his friend is in fucking trouble? That should be the main point you bring. Not, oh, but you promised me. That has nothing to do with anything. It's another scene not playing out as it should. Everyone keeps forgetting about what's at stake. Do the writers want me to not take Sauron's threat seriously? The scene should play out exactly as Galadriel rushes in, tells him about Celebrimbor needing help, and then Elrond grabs his coat and they go. But none of this has happened. We instead have a depressed Elrond building a boat for some reason, and Galadriel taking her time trying to convince him when he shouldn't need to be. So Elrond tells her to leave, and that's that, I guess. Now Elrond has been fucked over by the script. We then cut to Cirdan, who Elrond's gone to talk to for advice on what to do for some reason, and we're in for a lot of bad analogies. Cirdan asks him if he doesn't wish to live in beauty, and Elrond tells him he can't trust the rings, asking what is beauty when it's born in part of evil. Cirdan's response is no less beautiful, and goes on to ask would he cast Ramil's verses into the flames because the poet was a drunkard. So that's bad analogy 1, poetry isn't in any way comparable to evil rings, and Sauron isn't comparable to a fucking drunk, you cock. He's essentially Satan. So that analogy doesn't work if they are completely removed from one another. This is the wisest elf, apparently.
Leave judgment concerning those who wrought it to the judge who sees all things.
That is something well and good when it refers to someone whose major fault is being a drunk, but when it comes to someone like Sauron, who can use you with magic for his own evil ends, maybe that shouldn't apply? It's not even about judging. Elrond is questioning the rings and thinking of the full picture. Cirdan just doesn't want to give his ring up. Of all people, maybe don't pull the leave Sauron alone angle because it makes you look suspicious as well. He then tells Elrond to have some humility, whatever that has to do with anything. He just thinks the rings are evil because an evil person wanted you to have them for a reason. Elrond says he wishes he could know Cirdan's peace, to which Cirdan says he can. He then becomes incredibly suspect when he says, we do not yet fully understand these rings, but look at the power they exert over every life form. He does this as he sticks his hand in the water and fish are drawn to the ring. Okay then. I think this guy's evil. Because that's a pretty villainous line about control over another life form. Elrond should be even more suspicious now, but he doesn't seem to notice. Cirdan continues saying that the rings in Sauron's hands could work an evil beyond reckoning, dominating the minds and wills of all. And that's why they should remain in the hands of the elves, which isn't addressing the point Elrond made. The fact is, Sauron took part in their creation and wanted you to have them. Try addressing that, but no one has. He then tells Elrond he's wise to fear this power, but not to let that fear blind you to the ways it can be used for good. It's not his enemy that bears it, but his friends. Yeah, that's what concerns him. His enemy wanted his friends to wear it. Do you not find that strange? No, he doesn't. He then finishes off by saying if he believes his friends have strayed, he shouldn't abandon them, but instead guide them. Why did Elrond have to be told this? Nothing in here is a convincing argument to stop him from worrying. If anything, it should make him worry more. And then it all leads into Elrond should guide his friends instead of abandoning them, which he already did. He tried to guide them on using the rings, and they ignored him and considered nothing he said. Why is Elrond, someone who's been alive for thousands of years, only just learning this? Something so basic as stand by your friends, which he did until the previous scene, where he somehow forgot he was supposed to give a shit about Celebrimbor. But that, I'm glad to say, moves us along to... maybe glad wasn't the right word. That's right, we're back with Not-Gandalf and the gang for some more wandering.
Hi.
We find them still walking across the desert, which was definitely a great plan when they specifically came this way to hide. They just didn't account for the fact it makes them easier to spot. Not-Gandalf is made to drag them across the desert and eventually collapses due to dehydration and heat. And as this happens, Poppy runs off claiming to have seen water. One would think that to be a hallucination, and they'd be wrong. There's very conveniently a well. So Poppy quickly tries to pull the water out, not before throwing what looks like to be a staff on the floor. I wonder why. Oh no, wait, I know why. Once Poppy brings the bucket out of the well, well...
I've got it!
There really is so many idiot characters. She does this and can clearly see the bell making all that noise. She knows people are hunting them and she doesn't think to try and stop it from happening. No, they're oblivious. Not-Gandalf wakes up and notices the convenient staff that was left behind by the set crew, saying it's similar to the one from his dream. It's not, but there's of course a reason for this, as the scavengers have now found them because of that dirty-haired idiot. The scavengers then ride towards them, and luckily enough, Not-Gandalf has this convenient staff, which makes it easier to use his magical abilities, even though this staff isn't remotely magical in nature. So when he does whip up a tornado, it all goes wrong except the fact they get out of this situation and the staff breaks. And Nori and Poppy are swept off, never to be seen again. I hope. So yeah, that was that. Moving on, I guess. Which takes us over to Eregion to find Celebrimbor trying to what seems like sleep with his assistant by showing her his moon letter collection. He then remembers Sauron is waiting at the door, where he seems to have been for an entire day or more. Celebrimbor then stupidly decides to go and talk with him, which only makes him look like an even bigger bumbling idiot when he turns up with an umbrella due to the pouring rain. Oh, he's still soaking wet. This is apparently Middle-earth's greatest inventor, and he can't even make an umbrella work. That's embarrassing. Celebrimbor tells Sauron to leave, or he'll be forced to, because he can't treat with him anymore, as per Galadriel's request. Then why did you even come out here? Why didn't you just tell your guards to remove him as soon as you realised he wouldn't leave? Sauron then pulls the "she said you'd say that" as if that's master manipulator material. But that of course starts to work on Celebrimbor, when in the back of his mind should still be the fact Galadriel told him not to treat with him for a reason. I mean, she could have just told him Halbrand was Sauron and none of this would have happened, but she's just a terrible person. Celebrimbor asks if he's spoken with Galadriel, which Sauron confirms, and Celebrimbor wonders if the rings have worked, which he should know. Surely he'd get some kind of feeling if the elves were in some way fading. Sauron figures out Celebrimbor knows nothing, making it easier to manipulate him. Although this still shouldn't work.
What about the High King? Surely he wouldn't neglect to send word of...
Well, that should make it obvious to Celebrimbor what he's trying to do, but he's like everyone else in this show, stupid. Sauron then pulls the reverse psychology of "I don't want to come in anymore," and Celebrimbor lets him in. This fucking spoon lets him in for not much of a good reason. All that he's heard shouldn't convince him to let Sauron in, when it's so obvious to anyone with a brain he's being manipulative, even with the performance and the way he says everything. And as soon as he threatens to leave, which is what Celebrimbor wanted and what Galadriel told him to do, he just lets him in. Why was this Sauron's plan, as opposed to just shapeshifting into a different person, to then gain access to Eregion? That would make a lot more sense. And that cuts us to Sauron being fed by the fire with his feet up. He tells Celebrimbor the rings worked, which causes him to cry and laugh at the same time, because he's glad to have finally created something that matters after centuries of failing.
Are you my friend?
Yes, of course.
In what way are you both friends? You worked together for a bit and barely knew anything about him, and then Galadriel told you not to treat with him, and you agreed. If you were in fact friends with Sauron, you wouldn't have listened to her in the first place, but now they're just friends apparently. Sauron goes on to say that there are no half-truths between those who've worked so close as them, and yet there's much Celebrimbor doesn't know. which Sauron wants to tell him. He says that he didn't come to Eregion to toast the elven rings, but to plead with him to make rings for men. Celebrimbor is against this idea because elves are not men and men are greedy. The risks of corruption are far greater. Even if he could provide the rings, the dwarfs would never give them the mithril. And Sauron seems to know that the dwarfs are facing a dilemma. My guess is the reveal is going to be he did something at some point to make them desperate for this very reason. He then reveals his name is not Halbrand, and when Galadriel discovered the truth, she cast him out. Sauron goes on to say that he's no king or even mortal. He's in fact been sent as a messenger to bring aid and guidance to the ears of the wise by forces beyond evil. And Celebrimbor doesn't think to himself that if this was true, then why would Galadriel cast him out? Sauron's story has so many holes in it that nobody accounts for. He goes on to say that Mordor was only the beginning and that all realms, including elves, dwarves and men, will fall, and the Rings of Power are their last hope of restoring light to Middle-earth. Celebrimbor says he cannot be expected to believe he's a messenger sent by the Valar. Yeah, definitely not evil. Sauron then vanishes, the lights go out and the fire begins to roar. Trust me bro, definitely not evil. We then hear Sauron's voice echo through the room, saying he's walked through deserts and faraway lands in search of an artist possessing the craft to save Middle-earth. And you came to Celebrimbor. Someone who didn't even know what a fucking alloy was and can't even make an umbrella that works. I know, it makes no sense. Sauron says a storm is coming and he can bring knowledge to unlock Celebrimbor's grandest abilities, and when the work is done, Celebrimbor will be revered instead of overlooked.
He said it! He said it!
Did they really have to have him say that? Because it just made me cringe. And by the way, how does this not come across as evil? Why would a heavenly messenger burst through flames? This guy looks evil as fuck, and why hasn't Sauron tried to actually change his appearance to actually look a bit more Jesus-y? Because this doesn't come across as a heavenly angel. But Celebrimbor buys it for some reason and goes down to bow, which Sauron tells him he doesn't need to do, and asks what he should call him.
Annatar, Lord of Gifts.
So Celebrimbor seems to buy this guy as an angel, even with the plastic surgery complexion and those dead stare snake-like eyes, who revealed himself by vanishing, bursting out of the fire. This guy is definitely not evil then. We then cut away to Lindon, where Galadriel has been summoned by the High King, who plans to put a team together.
You depart for Eregion at first light with 5 of our bravest elves.
5? Only 5? He does know they might come face to face with Sauron. He should be sending more than that, and he should have sent them a long time ago, but here we are. Galadriel thanks him for reconsidering, which, as he tells her, she shouldn't thank him, and then Elrond appears, who seems to have finally decided to join them to save Celebrimbor when he should have already wanted to do that. But for some reason, he had to go out and think about it first. Galadriel was grateful Elrond has joined her company. Oh, how stupid she's going to look now. Gil-Galad reveals that Elrond's task is not to join her company, but instead lead it. That's probably not the outcome she was looking for. And finally, that brings us to our final scene with Durin and Disa, who have received an invitation from Celebrimbor, who wants them to come to Eregion, which closes us out of episode 2. So that brings us yet again to the part of the video where we go over each plotline to see what we have with full context. And I suppose we'll start with Khazad-dum, which we find falling into ruin after the effects of Mount Doom, leading to their only sources of light destroyed, meaning they can't grow crops, which is where we have a few world building issues. Because for no apparent reason, the dwarves have chosen to grow crops inside rather than outside, which makes no sense. I don't understand why you'd go to all the trouble of building intricate mirrors to direct to crops, rather than walk out your front door and farm. They could even build an outside area for crops, but they haven't done any of that, which has left them without any food. And then they don't have a sufficient supply of trade or even reserves for when things like this happens. None of it makes any sense. And yet we're expected to buy into these troubles when it's troubles they've brought on themselves for being idiots. The people of Khazad-dum blame this all on Durin and his father, and not for the reasons I listed, but because an elf was simply allowed in. Which doesn't make a lot of sense when it was the dwarves on the door that let him in. So everything we have happen in this episode is to make the dwarves get desperate, so Sauron can convince them of taking the rings, and it was achieved through means of damaging the dwarves as a whole. Which then takes us to Lindon, where this time the writers are just coming up with ways to delay them from going to Eregion, and at the cost of the little character there is. Galadriel was in no rush to save Celebrimbor even after her vision, and when Gil-Galad finds out, he doesn't give a shit to just send an army there anyway without Galadriel. He instead just makes excuses until he's fine with her going with a group, which must include Elrond. Who again is another character that all of a sudden doesn't give a shit either. He chose to build a boat instead. The only thing that makes him reconsider is Cirdan, who didn't have anything of worth to say. Just bad analogies and making himself come across as corrupted, which Elrond doesn't pick up on. And then he decides to go to Eregion anyway when it's in his character to already want to do that. So I don't know why the writers were trying to make him seem conflicted when he shouldn't be for some quick drama. Only to then send him off on his way anyway. Their entire plotline was just to delay so Sauron could do his thing. Which, speaking of, didn't make much sense either. He goes to Eregion and just hopes Celebrimbor doesn't know he's Sauron, which if he did, his entire plan fails. But lucky for him, the messenger was killed, something he wouldn't have to worry about if he just changed his appearance. Celebrimbor then decides to talk with him when he doesn't have to and was told not to, only to be easily tricked into letting Sauron in the door. And when Sauron reveals himself to be Annatar, he doesn't look like an angel but instead a demon by bursting out from flames. And Celebrimbor just buys into it when he knows there must be a good reason Galadriel told him not to trust him. So now they're going to be working together to make sure the other races get their rings. And finally, that brings us to Rhûn, which still remains to be painful, and I get the idea this will be dragged out for the entire season. We're finally introduced to the Dark Wizard, where the only thing established is that he wants Not-Gandalf for some reason. And it's just another mystery to keep you invested, which is going to be a hard thing to do when you're not invested in the plot it's a part of. Where the whole time, all we get is the trio walking through a desert because they're being tracked by what seems like blind trackers, who eventually find them anyway because we're surrounded by idiots and it's the most contrived bullshit. They need water, a well randomly shows up, which has a staff beside it, so then the scavengers can be alerted, only to be stopped because Not-Gandalf found a random staff. So I'm just bored by everything this side of the show has to offer because it offers nothing of value. It just now and then rips off the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where the writers clearly don't understand why something works there, but not here. So it's pretty safe to say that this episode is worse than the previous episode by a big margin. Which makes me wonder what we've got in store for episode 3, because I'm not expecting anything better. So it's just the matter of, will it be as bad or not as bad? But I suppose we'll find out in the next video, so yet again I thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.